All right, and welcome back to the third segment of the Doepfer A106-1 Xtreme filter. This time around, we're going to be looking at modulation and resonance in this particular filter right over here. We're going to be looking at just some basic modulation examples using the CV inputs here in front of us. And then we're going to look at a short example of utilizing the resonance insert found over here in our A106 Xtreme filter. Before we jump in, I do want to do kind of a quick review of the sound source that we're going to be using in this demonstration in case you were not with us last time around. So if we go down to the bottom section of our rack, down here in the bottom section, we actually have a series of modules that are creating audio for us. They start over here on the left-hand side with our A110. We have a saw wave going out, if you follow this cable here, going into my VCA right here. And then I also have a sine going into that same VCA right here, just to kind of mix the two waveforms in my VCA. I adjusted the levels there accordingly. My output is going, as you can see, over here into my mixer. Whoops, unplugged it. Unplug it back in. Okay, so it's going over here to my mixer. And then my second input, if you follow that black cable over here, is actually going out from my phase lock loop right there. The signal in at the phase lock loop is actually coming from the same VCO right there. I'm just using this to kind of thicken up the sound a little bit. So it's basically yet another waveform going into there, but it's coming from the phase lock loop just to add a little bit more of variety to the sound. My VCA is being shaped by the A140, which is immediately to the right. And if you look at the very bottom, you can see the light going off here in our A140. This is being triggered by the Doepfer A155 trigger sequencer. So let's go over to that very briefly and just kind of show you what's going on over here. At the Doepfer A155, I have a series of pitches dialed in to the top row of my A155 sequencer. And over here on the far right at post out, it's actually going out, if I follow it back to my VCO on my A110, and going into CV input number 2, thereby triggering the pitch of my VCO. Going back to the A155, I also have trigger output 1 right up here at the top going out and going into this bottom section over here as well. That's the one that's responsible for triggering the A140 in my bottom section here. And then if we follow that back to the A155 again, I have one more trigger output going trigger out number 3 right here. This one actually goes up into the section. If I follow it right here, I'm going to kind of go by my lower section, but then it goes up over here into my middle section right here. And it's actually triggering the second envelope. This envelope we're going to be using here in a little bit to add some kind of rhythmic variety to our modulation. And then this black cable here is just actually the output that I'm going to be using to go to my mixer. Let me set that aside for a moment. From my A106 filter. I just happen to have it right there temporarily. But I just wanted you kind of to see what the layout is right now going on before we go forward and start processing. So now that we got that out of the way, let's go ahead and patch in our audio source so we can hear it. And I'm going to patch this in. So over to our A106. Here we go. So that is our sound source right there. And that's what we're going to be processing this time around. We're going to be doing some basic modulation. If I look up here at my A106, at CV input number 1, number 2, and then also at number 3. Going into our middle section though, right here, the A140, this is what we're going to use to modulate it. And you can see it's being triggered every so often by our A155. So I'm going to just take the output of this, and I'm going to go up into my A106, because we already know what this sounds like not modulated. Okay, so I'm going to take the output again of my A140, and then I'm going to pipe it right into CV input 1. Here we go. So that is our A140. If we go back down, you can see it being triggered at certain steps. And at those steps, it is creating that modulation effect up here at the A106 Xtreme filter. Nice little rhythmic variety. So I still have my little riff going on in the background, but now the filter is adding one more little rhythmic piece to the puzzle. Okay, so now I'm going to unpatch that. It's my first example. Now I'm back to just my regular filtered sound. I'm going to bring a cutoff to about there this time around. And this time we're going to use CV input number 1. So back down to the A140, we're taking this envelope and going up into the A106. Here we go. Into CV input 2. My attenuator is all the way down, so I'm not going to hear anything yet. But now I'm going to start bringing it in slowly. There we go. Kind of a mellow sound. So same idea. It's still modulating the cutoff of my frequency right here. I'm going to bring it up a little bit. Okay, so we got that. Let's go all the way to the max. Okay, so right there with the maximum setting here, we actually have similar to what we had up here, and we can verify that if we unpatch it. We have no modulation. If I patch it to CV1, I have exactly what I would hear at CV2 at my maximum setting right there. Okay, and so you can adjust this anywhere you would like. So if you want it right here, because you like it's a little more subtle, then you can use that. Okay, still doing pretty well, and we're doing just pretty straightforward stuff right now. Okay, so now we have no modulation, and now we're going to use CV input number 3. So I'm going to bring this all the way to 0 first. I'm going to bring it right there in the center. It's about 12 o'clock, trying to get it as close as I can to 0, so that way when I patch it, we won't hear any modulation, hopefully. So here we go. There we go. Dialed it in pretty well. We're hearing no modulation, but if we go down to our A140, we can still see that the envelope is being triggered the way it was originally. So now, if we go back up to our A106, let me bring in the positive variety, and we already kind of know what that's going to sound like, so let's go ahead and listen to that again. Okay, so we know what that sounds like. And basically one way to look at it is you have 0 to 10 all the way, but only on half of the dial. So essentially the same as what we had up here, except here you have a kind of broader range of settings for that same modulation. But that's the positive variety. Now let's listen to the negative variety. It should sound fairly different. Here we go. So that is the negative version of my modulation signal. down here at the A140. Okay. So I'm going to unpatch this temporarily because it just so happens to have worked out a little bit that we actually are using the A140 down here because it has an inverse output. So what if we take the inverse output of our A140, go up to our A106 right here, and let's say I patch it into CB3, and right there I should have about no modulation. But if I bring it in the positive direction, we have what we heard a little while ago over on the negative side when we were patching a positive envelope into this input. So this is basically giving a positive version of the inverse that we had down here. So turning it positive, I guess I should say. Or keeping it actually at the same inversion. Got confused there for a moment. So let's go the other way. And now if I go in the other direction, now we're actually getting a positive version, or what we know is the positive version that we heard a little while ago. And that's because we're actually inverting the inverted envelope. So we're getting a positive envelope. Okay. I'm not going to go into too much mind bending because it gets a little bit confusing if you try to think of, oh, well, this is an inversion of an inverted envelope, and I guess you could take it even further if you wanted to, you know, invert the inverted envelope if you had a secondary polarizer. But let's not get crazy or anything. This is just some basic examples. Okay. So that is that example of the inverted variety and the positive and negative.